The massive doors of the Galaxy Council chamber opened with a deep rumbling sound that echoed through the enormous space inside. Ambassador Lee stepped through wearing a simple black suit that looked very plain next to all the bright colors and strange shapes around him. The alien beings in the chamber turned to look at him, and many of them made soft sounds of surprise or curiosity. Lee was not what most of them expected when they heard Earth was sending someone to speak for humanity. He looked young, maybe 30 years old by human counting. His hair was black and neat. His face showed no fear or worry, even though he was surrounded by creatures that could destroy his entire world with a single command. Some of the aliens were 3 times taller than him. Others floated in the air, inside bubbles of energy. A few looked like giant insects with too many eyes and legs. The chamber itself was bigger than any building on Earth. The ceiling was made of crystal that let in light from the 3 suns outside the walls, showed moving pictures of all the different worlds that belonged to the Galaxy Council. There were ocean planets covered in purple water, desert worlds with cities made of glass, forest planets where the trees grew as tall as mountains. Lee had seen pictures of these places, but being here in person made him feel very small. The Zentari Prime Minister stood at the center of the room on a platform that slowly turned so everyone could see him. He was tall and thin, with silver skin that seemed to glow. His 3 eyes were arranged in a triangle on his face, and they never seemed to blink. When he spoke, his voice came through speakers that translated his words into every language in the galaxy. The situation grows worse every day, he said. The Shadow Fleet has attacked 6 more colonies in the past month. They take everything they can carry and destroy the rest. We have lost millions of innocent lives, and the attacks are getting bigger and more violently. Listened as other aliens stood up to speak. The Vorthek ambassador was a large creature that looked like a slug with arms. He moved very slowly and spoke even slower about the need for peaceful solutions. The hegemony representative was so old that parts of his body had been replaced with machines. He talked about trade sanctions and diplomatic meetings. One by one, they all said the same things. They wanted to try talking to the Shadow Fleet again. They wanted to offer them money or resources to stop the attacks. They wanted to send messages asking for peace. Lee had read all their previous reports. He knew they had tried these things many times before and nothing had worked. The Shadow Fleet was not interested in talking. They were not interested in money or trade deals. They only wanted to take what they wanted and hurt anyone who tried to stop them. They had been doing this for 5 years now, and they were getting stronger with each attack. A delegate from the Corvani species stood up to speak, and Lee could see the sadness in her large blue eyes. Her people had been attacked just 2 weeks ago. Their main city had been bombed from space, and 3 billion people had died. The Shadow Fleet had taken their children as slaves and stolen all their food and medicine. Please, she said in a voice that shook with emotion, we must find a way to stop them. My people cannot survive another attack like that. We have nothing left to give and nowhere else to run. Her words were translated into every language, but the pain in her voice needed no translation. Other species nodded in agreement. Many of them had suffered similar attacks. The Shadow Fleet would appear without warning, strike fast, and disappear before any help could arrive. They knew all the trade routes and seemed to know exactly when each world would be most vulnerable. It was like they had spies everywhere. The Metheny delegate was next to speak, but he was very different from the others. His body was made of pure energy contained inside a crystal shell that sparkled with different colors. He did not have a mouth, but somehow his thoughts became words that everyone could understand. We have tried military action before, he said. The result was disaster. Our peacekeeping ships are not designed for real war. We lost an entire fleet trying to chase the Shadow Fleet into the Dark Nebula. Our weapons are meant to stop small conflicts between trading partners, not fight a real enemy that wants to destroy everything. Lee had been quiet during all of this, listening and watching. He could see that these beings were good people who really wanted peace. They had built something beautiful in the galaxy, many different species working together, sharing knowledge and resources. But they had also grown soft. They had forgotten that sometimes peace had to be protected with strength. When the Zentari Prime Minister asked if anyone else wanted to speak, Lee stood up. The chamber became very quiet. All the different sounds that the aliens made when they talked stopped. Everyone looked at the young human who seemed so small and simple compared to all of them honored delegates. Lee began, and his voice was clear and calm. I have listened to everything you have said today. I understand that you want peace. I understand that you do not want more violence, but I think there is something you need to understand about the situation you are facing. He walked closer to the center of the room, so everyone could see him better. Some of the aliens moved back a little, as if they were nervous about having a human so close. Lee noticed this, but he did not let it bother him. The Shadow Fleet is not interested in peace, he continued. They do not want to negotiate or make deals. They want to take everything you have built and destroy whatever they cannot use. They are not traitors or diplomats. They are predators, and you are their prey. A few aliens made angry sounds at this. The hegemony representative stood up quickly, his mechanical parts making whirring noises. You cannot understand the complexity of galactic politics, human, he said. Your species has only been part of this council for 50 years. We have been dealing with conflicts like this for thousands of years. Lee smiled, but it was not a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that appeared on a person's face when they knew something that others did not. Maybe that is exactly why you should listen to what I'm about to say, he replied. His voice was still calm, but there was something else in it now, something that made even the biggest aliens pay attention. You have been dealing with conflicts for thousands of years, Lee continued, but you have been dealing with civilized conflicts, disputes between reasonable people who ultimately want the same things as you. The Shadow Fleet is not reasonable. They do not want the same things as you. They want everything you have, and they want you dead or enslaved. The chamber erupted in noise as dozens of species tried to talk at once. Some made clicking sounds, others roared, and a few transmitted bursts of electronic signals. Lee waited patiently for them to calm down. He had expected this reaction. When the noise died down, Lee spoke again, and this time his words would change everything. I'm not here to criticize your wisdom or your achievements, he said. You have built something remarkable in this galaxy, but that remarkable thing is dying while you debate how to save it, sometimes to protect what you love. You have to be willing to fight for it, and sometimes you have to be willing to let others fight for you. When you cannot fight for yourselves, the silence that followed was complete. Even the background hum of the space station's systems seemed to stop. The aliens looked at each other, then back at the young human who had just challenged everything they believed about how the galaxy should work. Lee could see understanding beginning to appear in some of their eyes. They were starting to realize that he had not come here to ask for their help. He had come here to tell them what humanity was going to do. The tension in the council chamber grew thicker as Ambassador Lee stepped closer to the central speaking platform. The aliens around him shifted nervously in their seats or floating devices. Many of them had lived for hundreds or even thousands of years, longer than Lee had been alive. They had seen the rise and fall of entire civilizations, and now this young human was challenging their most basic beliefs about how to handle problems. Lee could feel their eyes on him. Some were curious, others were angry, and a few seemed frightened. He understood why they felt this way. Humans were still newcomers to the galaxy in the time it took some of these species to decide what to have for breakfast. Humanity had gone from living in caves to traveling between the stars. Dr. Kim sat in the human delegation area, watching everything carefully. She was Earth's chief military advisor and had served in the Terran Defense Corps for 20 years before becoming a diplomat. Her hands were covered by formal white gloves, but underneath were scars from battles on 3 different worlds. She had fought pirates in the asteroid belts around Mars. She had led ground troops against rebels on Europa. She had been in space battles where ships exploded around her and friends died in the cold vacuum of space. The aliens in this chamber had no idea what real war looked like. They talked about conflicts and disputes, but they meant arguments over trade routes or disagreements about mining rights. They had never seen what happened when someone decided that talking was over and killing should begin. They had never watched cities burn from orbit or picked up pieces of their friends after a bomb went off. You speak of complexity, Lee said to the Zentari Prime Minister, but his voice carried easily through the vast chamber. Sometimes the simplest truth is the hardest to accept. The Shadow Fleet does not want to negotiate. They do not care about your trade agreements or your ancient treaties. They want to take everything you have built and burn whatever they cannot carry away. The Vorthic ambassador made a wet, bubbling sound that his translator turned into words. Violence only creates more violence, young human. This truth has been proven across the galaxy for thousands of years. We have learned that peaceful solutions always work better in the long run. Lee turned to look directly at the slug-like creature. Have you really learned that? Because from where I stand, your peaceful approach has created exactly the conditions that let the Shadow Fleet do whatever they want. They know you will not fight back. They know you will keep talking while they keep killing. They know you will offer them gifts and treaties while they turn your children into slaves. Dr. Kim felt her heart racing as she watched Lee challenge beings whose civilizations had been exploring space when humans were still figuring out how to make fire. But she also felt proud. This was exactly why Earth had chosen Lee to represent them. He could see the situation clearly without being confused by thousands of years of tradition and diplomatic protocol. Minister Park sat beside Dr. Kim and tried to keep her face calm. She was Earth's senior trade representative and had spent years learning about alien cultures and customs. She knew that what Lee was doing right now was incredibly dangerous. These species could ban humanity from the galaxy. They could cut off all trade. They could even declare war on Earth if they felt insulted enough. But she also knew that Lee was right. The Galaxy Council had been trying to solve the Shadow Fleet problem for 5 years, and the attacks were getting worse instead of better. Every month brought news of more colonies destroyed, more civilians killed, more resources stolen. The peaceful approach was not working, and everyone knew it, even if they did not want to admit it. The chamber erupted in angry sounds as dozens of species tried to speak at once. Roars, clicks, electronic pulses, and sounds that human ears could not even properly hear filled the air. The translation systems struggled to keep up with all the different languages being spoken at the same time. Lee waited calmly in the center of it all, like a rock in a stormy ocean. When the noise finally died down, he continued speaking, and his words were like hammer blows against everything the council believed. I am not here to insult your wisdom or question your achievements. You have built something beautiful in this galaxy, a community where different species can work together and learn from each other. But that community is under attack, and it is dying while you debate how to save it. Captain Cho listened to the broadcast from his ship in orbit above the council station. His vessel was officially an escort ship meant to protect the human delegation, but it carried enough firepower to level a small city. His crew were veterans of the Mars Rebellion and the pirate wars around Jupiter. They knew what their ambassador was about to propose, and they knew how the galaxy would react. The ship's weapons officer, Lieutenant Yoon, checked her systems for the 100th time that day. She had grown up on a colony world that had been attacked by raiders. When she was 12 years old, she remembered hiding in a basement while explosions shook the ground above her. She remembered the smell of burning buildings and the sound of people screaming. She remembered watching her older brother march off with the militia to fight the attackers and never seeing him come home. These aliens in their fancy chamber had never experienced anything like that. They lived on peaceful worlds where the biggest danger was a traffic accident or a natural disaster. They had no idea what it felt like to watch your home burn while you waited for someone else to save you. They had no idea what it felt like to realize that no one was coming to help. Sometimes, Lee continued, and his voice grew harder, sometimes to save what you love, you have to be willing to fight for it. I know that goes against everything you believe. I know you think there is always a peaceful solution to every problem, but some problems can only be solved with action, not words. The Metheny delegate pulsed with different colors as he became more agitated. We understand your frustration, human, but surely you do not suggest that we abandon thousands of years of successful diplomacy. Our methods have prevented countless wars and saved billions of lives. Lee looked at the energy being with something that might have been pity. Your methods work when everyone involved wants to find a peaceful solution. The Shadow Fleet does not want peace, they want conquest. They want to rule over the ashes of your civilization. They want your species to serve them or die trying to resist. He paused and looked around the chamber, meeting the gaze of as many delegates as he could. You keep talking about preventing war, but the war has already started. The Shadow Fleet began it when they decided your lives were worth less than the resources they could steal from your worlds. The only question now is whether you fight back or simply accept your fate. The silence that followed was different from before. It was not the angry silence of people who disagreed. It was the thoughtful silence of people who were beginning to understand something they did not want to accept. Lee could see it in their faces. The slow realization that maybe the young human was right, maybe their peaceful methods were not enough to deal with a truly evil enemy, and that was when Lee spoke the words that would change the galaxy forever. "We did not come here to ask for your permission," he said quietly. "We came here to tell you what humanity is going to do about this problem." The silence that followed Lee's words stretched for long moments that felt like hours. Even the constant background hum of the station's life support system seemed to fade away. The human ambassador stood calmly in the center of the chamber, surrounded by beings whose ancestors had been exploring space when Earth was nothing but a blue dot barely visible in their telescopes. Captain Cho listened to the diplomatic broadcast from his bridge high above the council station. His ship, the Soul, was officially listed as a light escort vessel, but it packed enough firepower to take on a small fleet. His crew had been handpicked from veterans of the Outer Colony Wars and the pirate conflicts around the gas giant planets. They knew exactly what their ambassador was about to say, and they knew how the galaxy would react. The Shadow Fleet has 27 confirmed battle groups. Lee continued as he activated a holographic display that appeared in the center of the chamber, red markers scattered across a three-dimensional map of the galaxy showing where the raiders had been spotted in recent months. They have conquered or completely destroyed over 100 star systems in the past 5 years alone. The hologram zoomed in to show specific systems that had been attacked. Worlds that had once been green and blue were now brown and lifeless. Mining stations that had employed millions of workers were now empty hulks drifting in space. Trade routes that had carried goods and people across thousands of light years were now empty corridors that no one dared to enter there. Technology improves with every victory, Lee said as the display showed captured ships being stripped for parts and weapons every time they defeat someone. They take their best equipment and add it to their own fleets. They are not just raiders anymore, they are becoming a true military force that could threaten the entire galaxy. The Metheny representative pulsed with agitated colors that shifted from blue to red and back again. "We know the statistics, human. What we seek are solutions that do not involve the slaughter of millions of innocent beings. There must be some way to reach a peaceful agreement with them," Good Lee said, and his smile returned, but it was not a warm expression. It was the kind of smile that appeared on the face of someone who knew a secret that others did not. "Because I am not here to ask you to fight. I am not here to request troops or ships or weapons from any of your species." The explosion of sound that followed was unlike anything the council chamber had ever heard before. Delegates roared, clicked, buzzed, and transmitted angry bursts of electronic data. The idea that one species, especially one as young and small as humanity, would take action alone against a threat that had defeated the combined efforts of the entire galaxy was beyond their ability to understand. General Nam stood calmly beside Lee as the chaos erupted around them. She was Earth's highest-ranking military officer present, and her uniform bore the scars and decorations of battles on 3 worlds and 2 space stations. She had seen what humans could accomplish when they stopped talking and started acting. The galaxy was about to receive an education in human warfare. "You cannot be serious," the Zentari Prime Minister said, when some semblance of order was finally restored. His 3 eyes were wide with what looked like fear or shock. "The Shadow Fleet would destroy your entire species before your ships could even reach the outer territories. You have no idea what you would be facing." Lee's expression grew deadly serious, and when he spoke his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Prime Minister, with all due respect, you do not know very much about humans, do you? We have been fighting wars since before we learned how to make proper tools. We turned killing into an art form, then into a science, and finally into something approaching a philosophy." He gestured to the holographic display, which now showed human colony worlds scattered throughout council space. Each one looked peaceful and prosperous, with green continents and blue oceans, cities that sparkled with light, orbital platforms that handled trade and communication. But Lee knew that appearances could be deceiving. The Shadow Fleet thinks they understand warfare because they can destroy undefended colonies and helpless merchant ships. They have spent 5 years beating up people who do not know how to fight back. They think this makes them strong. They think this makes them dangerous. Dr. Kim watched from the human delegation area as her ambassador prepared to deliver the words that would change everything. She had spent 20 years in the Terran defense corps fighting in conflicts that the peaceful council species could not imagine. She had seen humanity at war, and she knew what that really meant. They are about to learn, Lee continued, and his voice grew quiet so that everyone in the chamber had to strain to hear him. What happens when they face a species that has spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of war? The chamber fell silent again, but this time it was different. This was not the silence of people who disagreed or were angry. This was the silence of people who were beginning to understand that they might have seriously underestimated the species they had dismissed as young and inexperienced. Lieutenant Colonel Park listened to the broadcast from the assault ship Bison. Somewhere in the darkness between star systems, her Marines were veterans of the toughest battles humanity had ever fought. They had cleared pirate bases from asteroid fields, they had stormed space stations held by rebels, they had fought in the vacuum of space and in the crushing gravity of heavy worlds. The aliens in that chamber had no idea what they were really looking at when they saw humans. They saw a young species that had only recently learned to travel between stars. They saw diplomats in simple clothing and small escort ships, but they did not see the military infrastructure that humanity had built in secret. They did not see the weapons that had been developed during centuries of constant warfare. They did not see the training and experience that every human soldier carried. Your proposal is madness, said the hegemony's first speaker. A being so ancient that most of his body had been replaced with mechanical parts? You would start a war that could spread across the entire galaxy. The consequences would be beyond calculation. The war has already started. Lee replied, and his voice was patient, as if he were explaining something simple to a child. The Shadow Fleet started it when they began murdering innocent people. The only question is whether the galaxy fights back or simply accepts whatever they choose to do to youth. Corvani delegate, whose homeworld had been devastated just weeks earlier, spoke in a voice that trembled with emotion. My people, we lost 3 billion lives in the last attack. Our children, our elders, our greatest artists and thinkers. If the humans believe they can stop this horror, perhaps we should listen to what they have to say. Lee turned to face the grief-stricken alien, and his expression softened. We remember every species that has suffered. We remember every world that has been lost, every life that has been taken by these monsters. And we promise you this, the Shadow Fleet will answer for every crime they have committed. He looked around the chamber one more time, meeting the eyes of delegates who represented civilizations that had existed for millennia before humanity had even discovered fire. When we are finished, he said quietly, there will be no more Shadow Fleet. There will be no more raids on defenseless colonies. There will be no more children sold into slavery or elders murdered for the crime of being too old to work. The promise hung in the air like a physical thing, and for the first time since the crisis had begun, some of the aliens in the chamber began to feel something they had almost forgotten: hope. The emergency session continued for 6 more hours after Lee's declaration, but the mood in the chamber had changed completely. Representatives who had entered the meeting expecting another round of failed diplomatic discussions now found themselves debating something that none of them had ever considered before: one species taking unilateral military action against a threat that had defeated the combined efforts of 43 different civilizations. Commander Yoon received her orders while the debate raged in the chamber below her ship. The Incheon was part of the Terran battle fleet that was already moving toward the Outer Rim territories. Unlike the Council's diplomatic vessels, which were designed to look beautiful and impressive, human warships were built for one purpose only: to fight and win battles. They were dark, angular shapes that bristled with weapon systems developed through centuries of warfare. The debate in the chamber grew more heated as different species began taking sides. The newer members of the Council, those who had joined within the last few centuries, seemed interested in humanity's bold proposal. They had not yet grown as comfortable with endless discussion as the older civilizations. Some of them remembered what it was like to face real threats without having the luxury of debate. The Corvani delegate stood again, and this time her voice was stronger. My people have nothing left to lose, she said. The Shadow Fleet took our children as slaves and murdered our elders for sport. They destroyed our libraries and museums and art galleries. If there is any chance that the humans can stop this from happening to other worlds, then I say we should let them try several other species, murmured agreement. Many of them had suffered similar attacks in recent years. They had watched helplessly as their colonies were destroyed and their people were killed or enslaved. They had begged the council for help and received only promises of more discussions and diplomatic initiatives, but the older, more established civilizations saw things very differently. They viewed humanity's proposal as dangerous foolishness that could destabilize the entire galaxy. The hegemony's first speaker was one of the most vocal opponents, and when he stood to address the chamber, his mechanical parts made whirring and clicking sounds that were somehow menacing. You proposed to unleash a war that could consume every system in the galaxy, he said, his ancient voice carrying the weight of millennia. The humans are young and inexperienced. They do not understand the consequences of large-scale military action. They could destroy everything we have built over thousands of years. Admiral Beak listened to the debate from his flagship somewhere in the darkness between star systems. He commanded the largest human fleet ever assembled, though the galaxy had no idea how many ships humanity actually possessed. The council species thought in terms of dozens of vessels. Humans thought in terms of thousands. The irony was not lost on him. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations were afraid of war precisely because they had forgotten how to fight. They had grown comfortable with their peace and prosperity. They had forgotten that sometimes evil only understood one language, and that language was force applied with overwhelming determination. Lee listened to the arguments for and against his proposal with the patience of someone who had expected exactly this reaction. He knew that some species would support humanity while others would oppose them. He also knew that it did not really matter what the council decided. Earth had already made its choice. Shin took careful notes as she observed the different alien reactions. Some species showed what appeared to be fear in their body language and vocal patterns. Others displayed confusion or uncertainty. And a few, particularly the younger civilizations, showed something that might have been excitement or hope. Humanity was not asking for permission anymore. They were announcing what they intended to do. The Zentari Prime Minister tried one more time to dissuade the humans from their course of action. Even if your species possesses greater military capability than we realize, he said, the Shadow Fleet has had 5 years to prepare for war. They know every system in the Outer Rim. They have fortified positions and hidden bases. They have taken millions of hostages from conquered worlds. Lee nodded, as if he had expected this argument. We know about their bases, he said calmly. We know about their hostages. We know about their ships and their weapons and their tactics. We have been watching them for 3 years, preparing for exactly this moment. The chamber fell silent at this revelation. The humans had been planning for war while the council had been planning for peace. They had been gathering intelligence and developing strategies while the aliens had been writing diplomatic proposals. Captain Cho checked his tactical display and saw dozens of green dots moving through space toward the Outer Rim. Each dot represented a human warship moving into position for the largest military operation in galactic history. The Shadow Fleet had no idea what was coming for them. They were about to discover the difference between raiding helpless colonies and fighting a species that had turned warfare into a science. The debate continued, but Lee could see that minds were beginning to change some. Delegates who had initially opposed the human plan were starting to ask different questions. Instead of asking whether humanity should act, they were starting to ask what would happen after the Shadow Fleet was defeated. They were beginning to accept that the young species from Earth might actually be capable of accomplishing what they claimed. Minister Park watched the shifting mood with professional interest. She had studied galactic politics for years, and she understood how the council made decisions. It was a slow process based on consensus and compromise, but today that process was being bypassed completely. Humanity was forcing the galaxy to confront the reality that sometimes action was more important than agreement. The Vorthak ambassador made his wet bubbling sounds as he tried one last time to propose a peaceful solution. Perhaps we could offer the Shadow Fleet territory of their own, he suggested, a region of space where they could settle and govern themselves in exchange for ending their attacks on council worlds. The suggestion was met with stunned silence. Even the species that preferred diplomatic solutions could see the flaw in this plan. The Shadow Fleet did not want territory, they wanted to conquer territory. They did not want to govern, they wanted to rule over slaves and victims. They were not refugees looking for a home. They were predators looking for prey. Lee waited for someone else to respond to the Vorthok's proposal, but when no one spoke, he decided to address it himself. Ambassador, he said in a voice that was respectful but firm, predators do not become peaceful when you give them what they want. They become bolder, they see generosity as weakness, and they use it to plan their next attack. He gestured to the holographic display, which showed the expanding pattern of shadow fleet attacks over the past 5 years. Every diplomatic contact, every attempt at negotiation, every offer of aid or territory had been followed by more attacks. Not fewer. The pattern was clear to anyone who wanted to see it. The Shadow Fleet cannot be negotiated with, Lee continued, because they do not see you as equals. They see you as resources to be harvested. They see your worlds as places to be plundered, and your people as slaves to be taken. They will never stop taking from you, because taking is all they know how to do. As the session moved toward its conclusion, the galaxy began to understand that it was witnessing a historic moment. The age of endless discussion was ending. The age of human action was about to begin, and whether the Council approved or not, the Shadow Fleet was about to learn what happened when they threatened a species that had spent its entire history preparing for war. The vote, when it finally came, was closer than many had expected, but in the end it did not matter. The Council could approve or disapprove of humanity's actions, but they could not stop them. The human fleet was already moving, and the Shadow Fleet's time was running out. 3 days after the Council session, the first reports began reaching the chamber, and the results shocked everyone who heard them. The human fleet had engaged Shadow Fleet raiders in the Kepler 442 system, and the battle had ended in a way that no one had expected. The Shadow Fleet forces had been completely destroyed, while the humans had suffered no casualties at all. Colonel Moon commanded the Marines aboard the assault ship Bison, and her after-action report was filed with the characteristic efficiency that marked all human military communications. Enemy force consisted of 12 heavy raiders and 4 battle cruisers, she wrote. They attempted their standard hit-and-run tactics against what they believed was a defenseless colony transport convoy. We surrounded them in 47 minutes. Total enemy casualties: all ships destroyed, no survivors, human casualties none. The report spread through galactic communication networks faster than light-speed travel could carry it. Species that had struggled to defend themselves against even single Shadow Fleet vessels. Read about an entire battle group being eliminated without any human losses. It seemed impossible to beings who had spent years trying to find ways to simply slow down the raiders. Dr. Kang was the human fleet's chief strategist, and she understood exactly why the galaxy could not believe what was happening. For hundreds of years, the Council species had fought defensive wars. They protected their trade routes, defended their colonies, and reacted to threats when those threats appeared. But humans fought very differently. They did not react to threats, they hunted them down. The Shadow Fleet's greatest strength had always been their mobility and unpredictability. They struck fast at targets that could not defend themselves, took everything valuable they could carry, and vanished into the dark spaces between stars before anyone could organize a response. But humans had been studying their patterns for 3 years. They had mapped every attack, analyzed every tactical decision, and predicted where the raiders would strike next. When the Shadow Fleet arrived at Kepler 442, expecting to find a convoy of helpless merchant ships, they instead found a carefully prepared trap. Human warships had been waiting in the asteroid fields around the system's outer planets. Their sensors had been tracking the raiders since they entered the system, and their weapons had been locked on target before the enemy even knew they were there. Captain Lee commanded the destroyer Guangzhou, and her report explained the human approach in simple terms. The enemy expects their victims to react defensively, she wrote. They expect fear, confusion, and slow responses. Instead, we gave them aggression, coordination, and overwhelming firepower applied at exactly the right moment. They had no time to adapt to our tactics, because our tactics ended the battle before they understood what was happening. More reports followed over the next few weeks. Each one told the same story of swift, decisive victory. The Vega system raiders eliminated in 32 minutes. The Proxima Centauri pirate base destroyed so completely that nothing larger than a piece of scrap metal remained. The hidden Shipyards in the Coalsack Nebula turned into expanding clouds of radioactive debris. The pattern was always the same. Human forces would arrive at a location where Shadow Fleet activity had been reported. The raiders would attempt to escape using their usual hit-and-run methods, but instead of chasing them, the humans had predicted where they would go. Trap after trap had been set along every possible escape route. The Shadow Fleet found themselves surrounded and outnumbered. No matter which direction they tried to flee, Commander Park led a squadron of heavy cruisers in the attack on the Barnard star system, where the Shadow Fleet had established a major supply depot. Her tactical report showed how completely the aliens had misunderstood human capabilities. Enemy resistance was organized around defensive positions designed to withstand prolonged siege warfare. She wrote, "They did not expect us to simply destroy everything from orbit in the first 10 minutes of combat. Their ground fortifications became irrelevant when we eliminated their orbital defenses and supply ships." The Shadow Fleet began to realize that they were facing something completely different from the peaceful Council species. Human ships did not retreat when outnumbered. They called for reinforcements and pressed the attack. Human commanders did not try to negotiate with pirates. They destroyed them completely. Human Marines did not take prisoners from raiders who had murdered innocent civilians, but the most important difference was in how humans thought about warfare itself. The Council species saw military action as something to be avoided. Except in the most desperate circumstances, humans saw warfare as a tool to be used when other tools had failed. They did not fight because they enjoyed violence. They fought because they had decided that some things were worth fighting for. Lieutenant Colonel Kim led ground forces in the assault on a Shadow Fleet prison camp where thousands of civilians from dozens of different species were being held as slaves. Her report was brief, but it revealed something important about human military doctrine. "We did not negotiate for the release of prisoners," she wrote. "We did not offer to trade resources for hostages. We simply eliminated every enemy soldier in the facility and freed everyone they had captured." Freed prisoners told stories that spread quickly through galactic communication networks. They described human soldiers who fought with a determination that bordered on fanatical. They described tactical precision that seemed almost supernatural. They described a level of violence that was carefully controlled but absolutely devastating when applied. One Corvani survivor described watching human Marines clear a prison block that had been defended by heavily armed Shadow Fleet guards. "The humans moved through the facility like they had rehearsed the assault 1,000 times," she said. "Every door, every corridor, every defensive position had been mapped and planned for. The guards never had a chance to organize a defense because the humans were always 3 steps ahead of them." The reports created a problem for the Shadow Fleet leadership. They had built their entire strategy around the assumption that their enemies would be slow to respond and reluctant to fight, but humans responded faster than the raiders could move. And they fought with a level of intensity that made the Shadow Fleet's own brutality look restrained. By comparison, Admiral Zhang commanded the human task force that destroyed the Shadow Fleet's main communications hub in the Tau Ceti system. Her report showed how thoroughly humans had studied their enemy. "We knew the location of every major Shadow Fleet facility before we fired the first shot," she wrote. "We knew their command structure, their supply lines, and their tactical doctrines. We had been preparing for this war while they were still convinced that no one would dare to fight them." The GalaXY began to understand that humanity had not simply decided to take military action against the Shadow Fleet. They had spent years preparing for a war that they knew would eventually have to be fought. They had built weapon systems designed specifically to counter Shadow Fleet tactics. They had trained soldiers for the exact type of combat they would face. They had developed strategies that turned the raiders' greatest strengths into fatal weaknesses. But the most shocking revelation came when intelligence reports revealed the true scope of human military preparation. The Council species had seen only a small fraction of humanity's actual military capability. The escort ships and defensive platforms that protected human colonies were just the visible portion of a military infrastructure that had been built in secret over decades. As news of victory after victory spread through the galaxy, the Shadow Fleet's leadership made a decision that would prove to be their final mistake. They decided to make an example of humanity by attacking Earth itself. They assembled the largest battle group in their history, over 200 ships carrying enough firepower to destroy entire star systems. They believed that humans might be able to win small battles against isolated raider groups, but they were convinced that a massive assault on humanity's home world would end the war quickly and demonstrate that the Shadow Fleet was still the dominant military force in the galaxy. They had no idea that Earth's defenses had been designed specifically for exactly this type of attack. They had no idea that humanity had been preparing for this moment since the day they first learned that hostile forces existed in the galaxy, and they had no idea that they were about to face the full military might of a species that had spent 10,000 years learning how to destroy its enemies. The Battle of Sol lasted 18 hours and changed the galaxy forever. When it ended, the Shadow Fleet existed only as expanding clouds of debris drifting through the solar system and the frightened testimony of the few ships that had managed to escape to carry word of humanity's true nature to whatever remained of their scattered Organization fleet. Admiral Park stood on the bridge of her flagship as the last enemy vessel exploded against Earth's outer defenses around her. The combined might of the Terran Defense Force slowly powered down their weapons and began rescue operations. Ships that had been hidden in asteroid bases and orbital platforms that had looked like simple mining stations revealed themselves to be some of the most advanced military installations the galaxy had ever seen. The Shadow Fleet had approached Earth expecting to find a lightly defended world protected by the same small escort vessels they had seen at council meetings. Instead, they had flown into a trap that had been 3 decades in the making. Every asteroid in the belt had been hollowed out and converted into a weapons platform. Every moon around every planet had been fortified. Every piece of space debris larger than a shuttle had sensors and weapons hidden inside it. Admiral Chun commanded the defense grid around Mars, and her report captured the scope of what the Shadow Fleet had encountered. Enemy forces attempted to bypass our outer defenses by approaching through the asteroid belt. She wrote they were unaware that we had converted over 14,000 asteroids into automated weapons platforms. Each platform was capable of independent targeting and fire control. The enemy fleet was under constant attack from the moment they entered our system. The Shadow Fleet's battle plan had been based on their previous successes against Council worlds they had intended to overwhelm Earth's defenses with sheer numbers, destroy the orbital infrastructure, and then systematically strip the planet of resources and population. But they had never faced an enemy that had been preparing for exactly this type of attack since before the Shadow Fleet had even formed as an organization. Captain Kim led the fighter squadrons that harassed the enemy fleet during their approach to Earth. Her after-action report showed how completely the raiders had been outmaneuvered. We launched over 6,000 fighters from concealed bases throughout the system, she wrote. The enemy had no idea where our ships were coming from because they were coming from everywhere. Their sensors showed empty space, but that empty space was full of human weapons waiting for the right moment to strike. A battle was not just a military victory, it was a demonstration of human industrial capacity that stunned the galaxy. Weapons that had been building in secret for decades were unleashed all at once. Ships that had been disguised as civilian transports revealed advanced military systems. Orbital factories that had appeared to be producing consumer goods had actually been manufacturing the components for the most sophisticated defense network ever created. Lieutenant General Nam commanded the ground-based planetary defenses, and her report revealed another aspect of human preparation that the galaxy had never suspected. Earth's surface was protected by energy shields that could stop orbital bombardment. She wrote every major population center had underground facilities that could support millions of people for years if necessary. We were prepared for a siege that could last decades if the enemy had managed to land-ground forces. But the most shocking aspect of the battle was not the scale of Earth's defenses or the sophistication of human weapons. It was the speed and coordination with which the defense was executed. Every human ship, every weapons platform, every fighter squadron acted as part of a single integrated system. The Shadow Fleet found themselves fighting not just the ships they could see, but an entire civilization that had been organized for war. Commander Yoon piloted her destroyer through the wreckage of enemy vessels as the battle entered its final phase, her tactical log showed how thoroughly the raiders had been defeated. Enemy forces attempted to retreat when they realized the scale of our defenses, she wrote. But we had positioned ships along every possible escape route. They had no choice but to fight and die or surrender and face justice for their crimes. Most chose to fight. The few Shadow Fleet ships that did manage to escape carried word of the disaster back to their remaining bases. The news spread terror through what remained of their organization. They had lost their entire main battle fleet, their best commanders, and their most advanced ships. They had learned that humans were not the weak prey species they had believed, but predators even more dangerous than themselves. Ambassador Lee received the final casualty reports as he prepared to address the Galaxy Council one last time. The numbers told the story of the most one-sided military victory in galactic history. Total human military losses: 47 ships, destroyed 830. 2 personnel killed in action. Shadow Fleet losses: complete destruction of their main battle group, over 3 million. Enemy combatants eliminated, their command structure destroyed, and their remaining forces scattered across the galaxy. The emergency session of the Council convened with an atmosphere completely different from the previous meeting. Representatives who had dismissed humanity as warmongers now spoke carefully about partnership and mutual defense. Species that had doubted human military capabilities now requested defense treaties and asked for human military advisors to train their own forces. The chamber that had once buzzed with casual conversation was now silent as delegates waited to hear what the humans would say. Many of them were afraid that Earth would use its demonstrated military superiority to dominate the galaxy the way the Shadow Fleet had tried to do. Others hoped that humanity would be willing to protect Council worlds from future threats. Honored delegates, Lee began as he looked out over the chamber that had questioned his authority just months earlier. The Shadow Fleet threat has been completely eliminated. The Outer Rim territories are secure. Trade routes are open for business. Your colonies are safe, and your people can sleep peacefully knowing that the raiders will never return. He paused to let the reality of complete victory sink in. The species that had suffered under Shadow Fleet attacks for 5 years were finally free. The delegates, who had lost family members and friends to the raiders, could finally mourn without fear that more attacks were coming. But understand this, Lee continued, and his voice carried the weight of authority that came from absolute victory. Peace is not simply the absence of war. Peace is what happens when good people are willing to fight for what they believe in. The galaxy is safe today because humanity chose to act when others chose to talk. The Corvani delegate stood slowly, her blue eyes bright with tears of gratitude. What do you want from us now, humans? She asked. You have proven your strength beyond any doubt. You could demand tribute or territory or anything else you desire. Lee smiled, and this time it was warm and genuine. We want what we have always wanted, he replied, to be part of something larger than ourselves, to explore the stars with friends instead of facing the darkness alone, to build a galaxy where all species can thrive in safety and prosperity. He looked around the chamber one final time, meeting the gaze of delegates who now understood that humanity was not just another member species, but the guardian of galactic peace. But we also want the galaxy to remember the lesson of the past months, he said. Peace through strength is not just a human concept. It is the only way to protect what you love from those who would destroy it. The Shadow Fleet is gone, but there will always be other threats, other predators, who think they can take what does not belong to them. As the session ended and delegates began filing out to spread word of the new galactic order, the galaxy began adjusting to a reality where humans were not just participants in galactic civilization, but its protectors. The age of endless debate was over. The age of human guardianship had begun, and in the depths of space, other potential threats looked toward the galaxy's peaceful worlds and reconsidered their plans, because now they knew that hurting the innocent meant